weekend there. Otherwise, as we go into Saturday, we draw our attention to this band of showers to the northeast. That's going to bring showers down northern and eastern coast through Saturday, and these could be wintry over some higher ground as it marks a change to some more northerly winds, bringing some colder weather across the whole of the UK by the time we get through to next week. But for the rest of the weekend, some sunny spells around, but wintry showers starting to show their hand too, and
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. The State of the Nation, tonight. 50 Shades of Sue Gray. First, she was a humble civil servant. Then, the woman who held the former Prime Minister's future in her hands. And now, expected to become Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. And it emerged today that MI5 missed significant opportunities to prevent the tragic Manchester Arena bombing. Could it be, as Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, says, political correctness has allowed terrorists to go under the radar? I'll be unpacking that with international security specialist Will Geddes. The Tories are off for a bonding trip today. Drinks, receptions, even a pub quiz. But the question is, was I invited? You'll have to wait and find out. Plus, in honour of World Book Day, I've got author and journalist Lionel Shriver with me. We'll be delving into today's revelations about school lockdowns. So, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. I asked you, what is your favourite book? State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be hearing from our panel, journalist and author Harriet Sargent and Michael Walker of Navarre Media. We do love our socialists on this show. As ever, I want to hear from you. Please get in touch by emailing mailmog@gbnews.uk. Before all that, it's been a busy day, and here to keep us up to date with the news is our Paddington studio.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. And the breaking news this hour is that in the last half hour, a couple has been charged with gross negligence manslaughter after a baby's remains were found in Woodland in Sussex yesterday. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon have also been charged with concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. The couple went missing in January and were arrested on Tuesday. They're due to appear at Brighton Magistrates Court tomorrow. And also within the last half hour, further leaked WhatsApp messages by Matt Hancock have been revealed by The Telegraph. It reports the former Health Secretary's team asked if they could lock up Nigel Farage. The messages were allegedly sent in July 2020 in response to the leader of the Brexit Party sharing a video of himself drinking at a pub in Kent. A fortnight earlier, Mr Farage was at a Donald Trump rally in Oklahoma in the United States. At the time, under COVID rules, anyone entering England from abroad was required to quarantine for 14 days. It's reported Matt Hancock considered contacting the Home Office about a potential breach of the regulations. This is what Nigel Farage had to say a short time ago.
I was supposed to quarantine, I think, for 14 days. And was I, when I was photographed that day the pub's open, had I reached the full 14 days? Well, it was a bit nip and tuck. I think probably I hadn't quite reached the time. But you know what? Wherever I did, whatever I was doing when I was out there breaking these ludicrous rules, I always made sure I used hand sanitizer. I always kept my distance from people. And I have to say, you know, bad laws make people lawbreakers.
Nigel Farage speaking on his programme a short time ago on this channel. Now, in other news today, MI5's Director General says he is profoundly sorry that the security agency didn't manage to prevent the Manchester Arena bombing following the inquiry into the attack. The report found the security service failed to act on critical intelligence relating to suicide bomber Salman Abedi. It also found he could have been arrested at Manchester Airport 4 days before he went on to kill 22 people at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. A lawyer for the family spoke outside the inquiry and he said the victims had been failed at every level.
It is clear that Salman Abedi should have been referred to prevent. It is clear that the education system needs to be more vigilant in picking up signs of radicalisation. It is clear that Didsbury Mosque turned a blind eye to extremism in its midst. Sir John's report today contains many lessons. We must heed every one of them and make the necessary changes urgently.
Well, meanwhile, officials in Syria believe they have enough evidence to convict former ISIS member Shamima Begum of an international criminal tribunal is set up. Following a visit to Kurdistan, the Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle says authorities there asked him for a tribunal to be established to try thousands of former IS fighters and their families. Shamima Begum was 15 when she left London to join the Islamic State group. And as you've been hearing, Sue Gray has been hired as Sir Keir Starmer's new Chief of Staff. The senior civil servant led the investigation into Partygate. It's understood she'll resign her role at the Cabinet Office to take up the position in the Labour Party. The Conservative Party Vice Chairman Paul Holmes has called it an inappropriate appointment which should be blocked. The Labour leader says, though, that he's delighted Mrs Gray plans to accept the role subject to normal procedures. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, you've just heard who Sue Gray is, a senior civil servant who did the report that brought down the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson over the so-called Partygate. She could now be considered an official opposition spokesman. Ms Gray is an effective and diligent administrator. I worked with her when I was in the Cabinet Office and I was impressed by her. But her impartiality must now be brought into question. We knew before that her son, Mr Liam Conlon, is chairman of the Labour Party's Irish branch and has been known to bring his mother along to rather cosy meetings with senior Labour politicians in Parliament. The legal advisor to her Partygate report, who set out the legal basis for the attack on Boris Johnson, was the Remain-supporting Daniel Stillitz KC, who was on the record of calling Boris our reckless and dangerous Prime Minister, and that the future of the UK is collateral damage in this mad Tory fight to the death. Even at one point, and bear in mind he was the legal advisor to Sue Gray doing her report into the future of the Prime Minister, told people to join the Labour Party because now is as good a time as ever, and he was helpful enough to provide a link on his Twitter inviting his followers to do so. Well, the Labour Party is exactly where Sue Gray has now toddled off to, taking the advice of her KC. If you're not content with simply paying £5.25, 5 guineas incidentally, monthly fee, for a nice, shiny, laminated membership card in the post, she's gone straight to the top, being appointed as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. The neutrality of the civil service is a fundamental part of our constitution, vital for a functioning and trusted democracy. Now, Brexiteers have been criticised for saying the civil service was part of the blob and wasn't impartial, but now everyone can see why. It's not the Brexiteers who are politicising the civil service, they have politicised themselves. And that is why this is so deeply troubling. It is hard not to feel that she is being rewarded, offered a plum job for effectively destroying a Prime Minister, creating a coup. This latest act blows apart the idea of civil service impartiality, the progressive leaning mindset of those manning, or rather not manning, the desks of Whitehall, has not gone unnoticed by anyone in and around Westminster. The question must now be asked, and ministers will be asking it, how many other of the people they're working with may be off to aid Keir Starmer's operation in the next few weeks or months? In the case of Sue Gray, this appointment stinks. Her report brought down the First Minister of the Crown, who had a majority of 80 from the electorate, brought down by a bureaucrat who now turns out to be backing the Socialist Party. This appointment invalidates her Partygate report and shows that there was a socialist cabal of Boris haters who were delighted to remove him. The former MP accepted her 2 reports on the strict understanding that she was impartial, and that now looks wrong. No confidence can be placed in the evidence she secured or passed the police, or, now relevant still, the Privileges Committee in respect of the gatherings in number 10. So instead, there should be an investigation into her and to her appointment. We should have an inquiry into what she has done and her contacts with Labour whilst she's been a civil servant, particularly those with the office of the Leader of the Opposition. In the meantime, ACOBA, which made me wait 3 months before becoming a broadcaster, should look at its systems and should block her appointment until the investigation has been completed. It would appear that the Civil Service Code, which insists on impartiality, has not been rigorously stuck to, and we now know what her true allegiance is as she goes off to the Labour Party. Can anyone go from impartiality to partiality so seamlessly? Her report is discredited, along with the testimony that was collated by her. That's why there must be a proper inquiry, perhaps led by Boris Johnson. That would only be fair. Now, as always, I want to know what you think. Please get in touch. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm particularly delighted today to be joined by the former political secretary to Tony Blair, John McTernan. John, thank you for coming in. Do you think it is possible to move seamlessly from government to opposition in this way?
Well, you're going to find that out, and you and your colleagues are going to find that out, aren't you, after the next general election when you move to the opposition benches. Of course it's possible to move. The civil service work for the government of the day. When we came in 1997, there was some distrust, some suspicion. They worked to implement our agenda. You can have your own views, personal views, they can be religious views, faith views, political views. As a civil servant, you give impartial advice and you make impartial reports. And what I don't understand is what element of the report that Sue Gray compiled and tabled people believe is incorrect or inaccurate? Was it the booze fridges? Was it the wine suitcases? Was it the actual the emails from inside number 10?
Absolutely crucially is that her legal advisor was a KC who said join the Labour Party, and she appointed him and was using his advice to determine whether the rules had been broken. So she was getting legal advice on what the rules meant from somebody who was hostile to the government.
So you're talking about her or you're talking about him?
She appointed him, and his views were known.
Her investigation, her report was her report. The evidence that she found that she gave to the Metropolitan Police was looked at by the Metropolitan Police. Were they in some way tackled by the left, nobbled by the left, so they gave fixed penalty notices?
Well, the only fixed penalty notice they gave to Boris and to the now Prime Minister was absurd.
Well, it's the police. It's the police.
But that's not the point.
They made the judgment on the evidence and they gave them...
Well, they made a mistake. I mean, they bungled their report under great political pressure from Sadiq Khan.
The Prime Minister could have appealed. What he did instead was accept the report. He, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, he accepted the report in full. And he took it on the chin. And then your party and the public decided there was something rotten in number 10. It's all about the behaviour of the Prime Minister, the behaviour of his staff, the behaviour of the advisors, the culture inside number 10 at a time when so many people were sticking to the rules.
But the behaviour was all dependent on whether the rules had been broken, and who was arbitrating on those rules was a known supporter of the Labour Party who Sue Gray appointed to give her advice, and now she's gone off to be the advisor to the leader of the opposition, having defenestrated a Prime Minister.
You're still just being ad hominem. You're not pointing to a single point.
I am. I'm pointing to the legal point.
No, it's an ad hominem thing.
No,
You're
it's not.
attacking him for being Labour. He's a KC. KCs give opinions. KCs give advice. But
think of the Hoffman case, which you will remember.
The Permanent Secretary tabled that report.
But think of the Hoffman case, when the courts decided that Lord Hoffman, because his wife was associated, if I remember rightly, with Amnesty, should not have ruled on the Pinochet case. With legal advice and with legal opinion, it's very important to have the appearance of impartiality as well as the reality, isn't it? Isn't that within our constitution?
This is a report, an inquiry report by a civil servant who was appointed by the Prime Minister to investigate him, and the report has nothing in it that anybody who's been moaning on about Sue Gray can point to say that's factually inaccurate. Those photographs aren't accurate.
It's all in the interpretation.
And the most disturbing thing that I find in many friends of mine who conservatives was the way that the drunken staff,
not the Prime Minister,
the drunken advisors treated the permanent staff in number 10, vomiting in waste paper baskets, splashing wine over the walls, all that behaviour. The culture of number 10 was rotten.
Nobody's defending that. But what is in question is Sue Gray judged in that report. She didn't just produce facts, she gave her view of what had happened. And we now know that she is going to be the leading figure advising the leader of the opposition in the run-up to an election. It's quite convenient that her report got rid of the most charismatic Tory leader of recent times who won a majority of 80, isn't it? It's quite convenient.
But let's be clear. Boris was the architect of his own rise and the architect of his own fall. That man has never done anything that's not his own actions. He had the culture. He was the king of misrule, the lord of misrule, and the report. The thing is, the details of the reports, they were accepted by the Prime Minister. The facts were accepted. You can't say that Sue Gray changed the facts. The facts were the facts.
But it's the interpretation that matters, and the interpretation was in her report and her decision to refer it to the police because she was advised on the legal standing by somebody who was hostile to the government. But the whole thing fits together very neatly, and from the Labour Party's point of view, it gets rid of a leader you could not beat at the ballot box.
If he came back, we'd beat him. I mean, the man's beaten himself. The problem you've got is the Metropolitan Police looked at the evidence and they made a police judgment. And you've had to say you think that's the wrong judgment. I mean, there's plenty of villains down South London who have the same attitude, like, the cops got me, but the courts made the wrong decision. I mean, the process is the process. The PM could have appealed it. He didn't appeal it. You took it on the chin because I think he understood that what he'd done.
It's hard to say the Metropolitan Police is covering itself with glory at the moment. But thank you very much, John. After the break, we will be looking at the Home Secretary's comments about political correctness impeding our ability to counter terrorism. Have we become overly sensitive at the expense of our safety? We'll be tackling that one after the break. See you then.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. And thank you, you've been getting in touch. But Stephen, I don't agree with you. Boris was not brought down by Sue Gray. He was brought down by his support for Chris, pincher by name, pincher by nature. But that wouldn't have mattered without the Sue Gray report. Matthew, I agree with Matthew. Sue Gray is about as impartial as Jacob was in the Brexit referendum. And then Phil. Jacob, it's a disgrace that Gray will be allowed to take a job with Labour. This must be against impartial ethics, and I think Phil is spot on. The Manchester Arena bombing inquiry released its third and final report today, concluding that intelligence services missed a significant opportunity to stop the bombing. The attacker, Salman Abedi, had been on our security services radar for several years. The Director General of MI5, Ken McCullum, expressed his profound sorrow over the report's findings. The report, however, was published not long after the Home Secretary suggested that extremists have been allowed to thrive in a protective climate of political correctness. Well, at the time of the tragedy back in 2017, it was reported that one of the security guards at the arena had had suspicions about the attacker, but did not approach him because he did not want to be branded as a racist. So is the Home Secretary correct? This incident may be considered a one-off by some, but the recent independent review of our counter-terror programme certainly affirms the Home Secretary's concerns. Well, I'm glad to be joined today by the international security expert, Will Geddes. Will, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if you could give some context to the mistakes made by MI5, whether you think they were excusable, and whether you think they were influenced by political correctness.
Well, I think fundamentally, Jacob, there were some key issues which Ken McCullum has taken ownership for, certainly from the security services, in terms of the interception of Salman Abedi, especially when he arrived back in Manchester 4 days before he actually carried out and executed his attack. However, I don't think MI5 can be held fully and only or solely accountable for the failings which happened, because I think Suella Braverman has made some very valid points, obviously, on this rejig of Prevent, because there are a number of factors in how certain groups or certain individuals with leanings towards Islamic extremism, of those, only 22 had been referred through to Prevent. And this could be, and I think we can only speculate, was pretty much influenced by some kind of political correctness, that there is this concern about profiling, and that any of those agencies working, including obviously the police and their counterterrorism commands, they have to be very, very careful about how they're broaching these for potentially swaying the general public opinion.
Yes, and the Prevent operation wasted a lot of time looking at people who were of absolutely no risk because it was so concerned about being seen as being politically incorrect. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly fair. And I think also it was somewhat misguided. I mean, one of the focuses was towards individuals with mental health and mental illness issues. Now, certainly statistically, and I've seen an awful lot of data about this to see, you know, because it's very quick for people to look at someone with a perverse agenda who wants to carry out attacks against non-combatants, members of the general public, as someone who is suffering from mental illness. However, that's a very, very cruel slur on those that suffer from mental illness, and the vast majority of which are very peaceful and wouldn't want to actually sort of extol any kind of violence or aggression against other people, especially innocent ones.
Well, thank you very much, Will. I'm now joined by my panel, Michael Walker of Navarre Media and the author and journalist Harriet Sargent. Thank you both very much for joining me. I just wanted to start with the very chilling comment that was made after the Brighton bomb when the IRA said we only have to be lucky once. And I wonder if we might not be being too harsh on MI5 by holding them responsible when actually we know they've stopped lots of terrorist attacks and one got through. Or am I setting too low a bar for them, Harriet?
I actually think it's a bit rich that we're being so harsh on MI5. I mean, if you actually read the report, it's one man made one mistake. He should have passed on a report a day earlier, and he didn't. And that seems to me quite, not a very high-risk activity to have caused so many deaths. And I think MI5 is actually carrying the can for the failure, and the far bigger failure, of our immigration system, of our asylum and immigration system, and that we have at the moment large numbers, literally thousands of people coming into this country, and the border control have no idea of where they come from, or even basic things like what their age are. And yet suddenly MI5 is meant to know everything about them and being able to make a risk assessment. And
Michael,
that seems crazy.
Do you think that's fair? I mean, it turned out that I was being looked at by Prevent because they thought I was so dangerous because I seemed to be in favour of Brexit. And that is worrying, that they were looking at people who are elected politicians and they were letting real terrorists through the net.
I'll put that to one. I don't want to cast aspersions about how extreme your opinions are.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, I didn't hear the contributions of your previous contributor. But I do want to, I suppose, comment on the whole framing of this discussion, because we've had a report, which I think was quite a serious report, independent public inquiry. And what that has suggested is that there were serious failings from MI5. And yes, as you say, potentially this was one person's human error. But the big picture here, which we're not talking about, I think, is that this guy had come back 4 days earlier from Libya. Yeah. That wasn't an immigration issue. This was a British citizen, and he had gone to Libya to fight with jihadists, and that was part of British foreign policy. So for a long period, MI6 were quite keen on jihadists going because they thought they would fight Gaddafi and they would fight on the UK side. And so for us to be having a conversation about political correctness, cancel culture or immigration, when there is a serious government failure. So
you're saying there was a simple foreign policy failure, they were worried about Syria but not about Libya?
No, so that's not the failure that's not the failure I'm talking about. The failure I'm talking about is thinking that it's a sensible foreign policy to take out foreign leaders, as we did in Libya in 2011. We said we were just going to be doing a no-fly zone, but we went for regime change. At the same time...
Do you think regime change is a sensible foreign policy?
You're misunderstanding
good. Sorry, I thought you said that.
The foreign policy, which I am saying is a mistake,
yes, I agree
was
with that.
to
Yes.
bring about regime change in Libya. And at the same time, because MI6 thought it was useful to overthrow Gaddafi, to allow jihadists to go and fight in that civil war. Now, Salman Abedi, he learnt how to make a bomb in Libya, fighting in a civil war which started because of British foreign policy. And this to me seems much more important than political correctness. In this very sensible report, political correctness wasn't mentioned at all.
Well, can I just say that actually it is about immigration, taking your point, because Salman's father, Ramadan, originally was fighting for the Free Libya, the jihadist, and was actually a terrorist and part of a terrorist organisation. And yet he and his family were given asylum in the UK. And he then took his sons back to Libya, and they took part in the armed insurrection that was going on there. I mean, there's even
with
on
the
his
blessing of our
Facebook,
security services,
well, whatever.
But the report does mention the radicalisation through the family, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's a really important part of the problem.
And they were
so Harriet's point
exactly.
to that extent is
I mean,
fair.
he was actually carrying on Facebook carrying a machine gun of this 15-year-old boy. And then his mother and his family, they all moved back to Libya. And then the mother was still receiving benefits, housing benefits, tax credits were going into her account in London. And the bombers went back and used that money to bomb British citizens. So I would say it's a failure, quite an extraordinary failure on our immigration.
Because someone migrated to the UK in the 1980s and then had a child.
Someone was given.
I mean, if this is your anti-terrorism policy, what you're going to be doing is deporting everyone who migrated here in the past 40 years.
We should just simply know who is coming into the country.
We did know who was coming. We knew who this person was. We knew he was going to Libya. We knew he came back from Libya.
He was a member. No, I'm talking about his family. We did not know that his father...
Why don't we talk about the person who actually did the bombing?
We did not know that
the report says he was radicalised by his family, so it's fair to talk about his family.
The report doesn't just say he was radicalised. The report says his family had a role. The report, though, is quite specific.
And that his brother was involved and so on.
He became a terrorist fighting in the civil war in Libya. That's where he learned how to build bombs.
But the report also
and the report also suggested he returned back to Britain, potentially with a detonator in his luggage, and MI5 didn't check that. Now, that to me seems like a real error, and that's not about political correctness.
But the security guard did not go up to him because he thought he'd be accused of being a racist. So there is a politically correct element.
So that's one very specific part, and I think it's also important to put that into context, right? So one, the fact that you had someone who was able to go to the Manchester Arena with a big bomb in his rucksack.
Because if the security guard had gone up to him, it would not have happened. So you take out the final safety check because you're politically correct.
That wasn't actually the final safety net. So what actually happened in that situation is you had a security guard who saw someone looking suspicious, right? They thought they looked suspicious, and instead of going straight up to them, because I think it's a very reasonable worry that someone might have. Am I just going up to them because of prejudice? He didn't say...
What got 22 women killed.
No.
So, sorry.
What got 22 people killed?
What should I be worrying about? Yes, about prejudice
sending people out to go and fight a civil war in
children.
Libya. But then this is also important, so let me finish. So after he saw this person and decided, I'm not going to go straight up to him, what he did was radio to his superiors. The radio was jammed. He also would have at that point passed this on to the British Transport Police.
But it didn't happen. We're going to have to move on, I'm afraid. We are going to have to move on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael and Harriet. Still ahead, Rishi Sunak has pulled together a number of my fellow MPs for a bonding trip to Windsor. Was I invited or was I not? Find out after the break. Don't go anywhere, but you weren't dreaming of it anyway.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. Today, my producers had a few problems trying to convince a number of Tory MPs to join the show. And it later turned out that this was because the Prime Minister had decided to gather Tory MPs for a day trip to Windsor, what is known as an away day. On the agenda was drinks, receptions and pub quizzes. Now, I promised you I would disclose whether I was invited or not. And the answer is, I was. But why am I here instead? Partly because it's my pleasure and duty to be broadcasting, but actually I missed the invitation. It got lost in the sea of emails that one gets day to day. Anyway, this is an attempt by the Prime Minister to bring together the bits of the party, the factions of the party, and the question is, will this be a successful unity session? Still with me, my excellent panel, the author and journalist, Harriet Sargent, and Michael Walker of Novara Media. Michael, do you think bonding sessions work? Are they fun, or are they a bit David Brent?
I think it depends who attends. So I'm sure various Tory MPs will your presence may or your absence may or may not contribute to the the civility of the affair, I wouldn't want to say. I mean, I suppose, what is there to say about this? It seems to me that I'm not sure what they're going to talk about, because I don't think the next general election is going to be won or lost based on whether Tories can unite. I think it's probably already lost because the NHS is collapsing and people can see that it's the fault of 13 years of Tory rule.
Well, the last one, as I understand it, most of the jokes were at the expense of Matt Hancock. I have a feeling the same may be true this evening. We may find out, probably be in the Mail on Sunday at the weekend. But Harriet, do you think bonding works, or...?
Well, I think that the Tories could have tried it a lot sooner. I mean, they could have done with some more bonding, and it seems to be a bit late now to do it. But the Tories, I mean, they've got a lot to do. I mean, the things that they are traditionally famous for being successful at, which is sort of immigration, law and order and the economy, have all evaporated.
So both of you are actually saying it doesn't matter whether they're doing a paintballing session and that may be all great fun and they may all love each other by the end of it, but actually, can the Conservatives govern well? Can we deliver on what was promised in the 2019 manifesto?
The problem isn't that any MPs aren't getting on, it's that the country is crumbling around you. And I think that is probably because of 13 years of misrule. If you run all of our public services absolutely to the limit, it's called efficiency savings. What that actually means is you have no slack in the system. Then we get hit by a pandemic. Obviously, you guys didn't cause the pandemic, but what that meant is the NHS was ready to fall over, and that because it had a funding squeeze for the 10 years running up.
But there's one glimmer of hope for the Tories, is that all these things that they're failing on are the very issues that Labour actually are going to do even worse on. So,
immigration, Labour won't do anything.
Law and order, taxes. I can't see Labour doing any better. In fact, probably a good deal worse. So how is that going to play out with the electorate?
So Keir Starmer said he wants growth, but that's like saying people like motherhood and apple pie. He's got no plan to get it, has he?
I don't find Keir Starmer's leadership particularly inspiring, but I do think that I think most people look at the world around them, look at the country around them, look at the fact that you have to wait 12 hours for an ambulance to arrive, look at the fact that wages have been stagnant for 10 years and they're expected to be stagnant for another 10. That's 2 decades of lost growth.
That's why you need growth. So you can afford to pay things to get growth.
What I'm saying is, so there's 2 reasons one might vote, right? You might think that the other person is incredibly convincing, they've got a really inspiring offer. The other is you might look at the people in power and say they have fundamentally failed on every level, in every particular aspect of society you can look at. The Conservatives have failed.
But it's hard to believe Labour would have done any better under the pandemic, which is the main cause of the economic problem.
Well, Labour would have had us locked down for longer and harder.
Yes, and harder.
So,
they really would have locked up Nigel Farage.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at what they were saying at the time, I don't think that's necessarily true. But the bigger point here, I think, in fact, Boris Johnson handled the pandemic pretty poorly at very key points. So especially when it came to winter 2021, there was a long period whereby he was very reluctant to bring in even moderate restrictions, and that meant that we had a lot of people that died who didn't need to because the vaccine
was just much better not to lock down.
I actually want to make a separate point that I think will be less divisive, because I know that lockdown is a very divisive topic on this channel. So the separate point, I think, is as to why we would have been in a better position if Labour had been in power for the years previous, is that, as I say, because of a decade of austerity, what that meant is that our public services were already working at capacity. Essentially, there were no spare beds. There were, all you had to do was give the NHS a little push and the whole thing would collapse.
So
and
when
that's
you
what
say
happened.
austerity, what you mean is this country living beyond its means. That's what you mean by austerity. Austerity means having to cut things because we, as a country, cannot afford certain things.
Because Gordon Brown spent all the money.
No.
Well, exactly. Gordon Brown completely spent the money.
If you look at the countries that have had growth over the past 13 years, so especially America.
Well, America cut taxes under Donald Trump. Massive tax cut.
Donald Trump inherited a very good economy. So what happened after the financial crisis is that Obama was quite willing to pump some money into the system. We did the opposite. We decided, oh, look, no one's spending any money. We're entering a recession. Well, actually, for a while, Gordon Brown did pump money in, and that sort of rescued us for a little while. But then what happened is the Tories came into power. They said, oh, look, there's no demand in the economy. There's no investment in the economy. Let's stop investing ourselves.
They decided to try and cut the debt because otherwise what would have happened, it was what did happen with Liz Truss, is that people say, sorry, we're not investing in UK ink any longer. That's it.
£1 in 4 was borrowed when the Conservatives got in coalition in 2010. There was no money. £1 in 4 was being borrowed of government expenditure.
A country like the UK was going to be fine borrowing on the financial markets so long as you didn't have someone in power who had no plan. So the issue with Liz Truss, and I've spoken to people who work in the city about this, the issue with Liz Truss isn't so much that the balance sheet hadn't worked. No government in the modern age has a balance sheet or a budget that adds up like that. They saw her and thought, this is someone who doesn't have a plan, this is someone who's pretty irresponsible when it comes to economic policy making. She hadn't justified what she was doing.
They wouldn't lend her any more money. That was it.
And the Bank of England bungled as well. That was a major problem.
There was some complex issues with pension funds.
But that hasn't really, let's go back to the original question, is this away day actually going to cheer the Tories up? And more importantly, is there anything the Tories can do now to win this election,
Well, I hope on the away day they'll all have a small glass of sherry to celebrate. But thank you to both my brilliant panellists. I hope they'll come back. We had a real socialist who wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be running things, heaven help us. But coming up next, considering today's revelations about the neglect of children over lockdown have coincided with World Book Day, author Lionel Shriver will join me for a deep dive. We're back in 3. Make sure you are too.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Today was meant to be World Book Day, but because of the teachers' strike, many pupils across the country celebrated by dressing up as their favourite literary characters. Here are two of mine who were actually in school today. But this next gentleman wins the nationwide contest, and it was circulated all round. It was excellent. Well, this is the People's Channel. So for our nightly edition of Vox Populi Vox Day for World Book Day, we asked you, what is your favourite book? And the people have spoken.
It's World Book Day. What is your favourite book?
Matilda. Matilda.
Matilda, and what's yours?
Matilda.
And who are you dressed as?
Matilda. Miss Trunchbull.
Miss Trunchbull.
I like the Harry Potter books.
How about yourself?
Tom Gates books. My favourite book is Rapunzel. The Tiger Come to Tea. Minnie Mouse.
And what's yours?
Dragon.
Dragon. Yeah. Brilliant. And is that what you've come as today? And what have you come as?
Jack Sparrow. Jack Sparrow.
Brilliant. You both look fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I'm joined by the author and Spectator columnist, and actually one of my heroes, or heroines more strictly, Lionel Shriver. Thank you so much for coming in. First of all, World Book Day, do you think it's a helpful way of getting children to dress up when they go into school and take their favourite book in?
It's obviously a helpful way to get them to dress up. I don't know whether it's a good way to get them to read books. I am I'm always keen to grow my readership. So,
Excellent, yes.
You know, it can't do any harm.
Can't do any harm. But more broadly in education, you wrote extensively about lockdowns and the damage they were doing. How much harm do you think was done to children, not just because of the schooling they missed, but in the longer term by them being locked down for so long?
I think it's been devastating. I don't have any kids, so I don't have a lot of first-hand experience. But I know people who have kids, and I was one.
Yes, I was young once, but I disapproved of it.
I feel that the message sent to children during the entire period was that they didn't matter.
Yes.
Right? And you know, there was no medical evidence presented for most of the things that were imposed on them, if not all the things that were imposed on them. And they were just supposed to suffer. And it didn't matter. They were just little people. They were incidental. And if it in some tiny incremental perceived way made the adults safer, then it didn't matter how much they suffered.
I think that's absolutely unforgivable, because I've actually got 6 children. And the extraordinary thing about one's own children, but one then realises this more broadly, is how much the child is its own person from the moment of his or her birth, and they just grow into their characters, and they're not there just to be sacrificed to the convenience of a bureaucracy, or indeed of the teaching unions.
Well, if I were a child or a student, because I include the university population during this period, I would, I'd have an enormous chip on my shoulder. I would feel aggrieved.
And as we've seen the Hancock papers come out, it seems that the then Health Secretary was determined to bulldoze the Education Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, who I think comes out very well from these reports, who wanted to keep the schools open, and Hancock was just determined to shut down.
Yes, and I think that the discussion over masks was especially telling, because there was no evidence that masks help. Well, first off, that masks helped at all. The policy worldwide was brought in without any evidence, and there was considerable evidence before the pandemic that masks were completely ineffective and not recommended, which is why you had the likes of Anthony Fauci in the U.S. Saying, to begin with, that no, we're not going to do that. They don't do any good. And then there was this perfect pivot, and everyone started saying the same thing, which I'm afraid is the model for the whole pandemic, because it was a chorus. There was no debate about anything.
There was very little independent challenge. And it seems to me that before Easter of 2020, when the school term ended early, that was perfectly reasonable, because people didn't know what was happening, there was great uncertainty, nobody knew whether children were affected or not. But as you got into the summer, it became quite clear that children were at no risk at all, and yet they still weren't allowed to go back.
Yes, and there's plenty of medical evidence that they are at negligible, if not no, risk from COVID, and that therefore mass vaccination of children, unless they're immunocompromised, made no sense, because there was a risk to the vaccine greater than the risk of the disease itself. And again, the evidence didn't matter. The evidence never matters.
And crucially, the vaccine didn't even stop the spread, so there wasn't even the benefit of stopping other people getting COVID, because it could still be passed on by people who were vaccinated.
Yeah, I just feel as if children especially, all of us really, but children especially, were human sacrifices during this pandemic. And a lot of it was just symbolic. It was gestural. And, you know, the idea was they were little germ factories, and they were dangerous. And in some ways, they were dehumanized. And all that mattered was protecting the adults,
who mostly of teaching age weren't actually at risk either very much, that the people at risk were much, much older than most teachers are. So you weren't even protecting a particularly vulnerable group.
No. And, you know, you talk about, I am also much more sympathetic with the panic at the very beginning.
Yes.
I think we all are. Although I don't appreciate the fact that governments around the world all copied each other. I mean, that's just that's not a good sign. But by the time the second lockdown came around in November, much less by the time the third one arrived, there was lots of evidence internationally that lockdowns did not work. They did not slow the spread. They didn't protect healthcare systems. They were medically ineffective as well as being incredibly destructive. And nobody paid attention to it. And I know because I was paying attention because I was writing a column. I had to come up with an idea.
You wrote an excellent column. I enjoyed it very much.
Right. But anyone who stuck their necks out, as I did, got their heads chopped off.
Well, as it's World Book Day, I brought in a book, Fantastic Mr. Fox, which was my edition when I was a child. Is there a particular book you would recommend for children who may still be up watching now that they should read as their World Book Day book?
Gosh.
Something that perhaps you enjoyed as a child?
Well, I loved Where the Wild Things Are.
Where the Wild Things Are would be your recommendation?
Yes, because it's about a little boy who's disobedient.
Well, I've got 5 boys. They're all extraordinarily obedient. You know, they just do everything that... that may be a politician's answer. Yes, quite. Yes, I think children enjoy those sorts of books, which is why the censorship of books is such a bad idea. But thank you, Lionel. I'm just going to read a couple of things from Roald Dahl, one of which has probably now been censored. Boggis and Bunce and Bean, one fat, one short, one lean. These horrible crooks, so different in looks, were nonetheless equally mean. And then, of course, we have to end with a reference to Somerset. Spot it if you can. Home again swiftly I glide, back to my beautiful bride. She'll not feel so rotten as soon as she's gotten some cider inside her inside. Then Badger continued, oh, poor Mrs. Badger, he cried, so hungry she very near died, but she'll not feel so hollow, if only she'll swallow some cider inside her inside. Thank you again, Lionel. That's all from me for this week. Back up next week, but next, it's Patrick Christie's in for Dan Wootton. Patrick, what have you got in your store of delights tonight?
Well, I tell you what, I've got it all tonight, Jacob. Fabulous reading, by the way. Nigel Farage is live from America at the top of this show, reacting to the fact that, supposedly anyway, the Tories might have tried to lock him up. We're also going to be talking about the fact that Boris Johnson might have been brought down by the biggest stitch-up since the Bayer Tapestry. Sue Gray, she's only gone and become Labour's Chief of Staff. How on earth can that have really happened? Also, should we have drag queens in schools? I actually really want to know why on earth drag queens are so eager to perform to kids. I think that's possibly the bigger question. Look, I've got all that and much, much more coming your way 9 till 11 as I fill in for Dan Wootton.
So tell me, why do they want to lock up Nigel? Is it because he so successfully led us to a Brexit removal from the European Union, or is there some other thing that he's done wrong?
Well, I'll let him explain that. You'll have to tune in and find out. But I suspect it's because they're afraid of him, Jacob.
That's another book. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, or Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Nigel? Thank you so much, Patrick. That's all coming up after the weather, which you won't want to miss. Thank you for tonight.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So as we go towards the end of the week, there's not much change, with it being another rather cloudy day tomorrow with some light showers around. And this is all due to high pressure that we've seen dominating the UK weather over the last week or so. It's not going anywhere for another day, but as we go through the weekend and into next week, we might just start to see a change. But looking through this evening, it's quite a cloudy night with plenty of cloud around for central and eastern areas. And this will spread southwestwards through tonight, so becoming increasingly cloudy. But there will be some clearer spells across Scotland, West Wales and southwest England, where we could just see a patchy frost to start Friday. So it'll be a rather cloudy start for many to end the week, but we will start to see some sunnier spells developing down eastern coast throughout the day, particularly as we get into the afternoon. So there will be some sunny spells around for some, but in any thicker bits of cloud, we might just see the odd light shower as well into tomorrow. But temperatures will be feeling pretty pleasant in the sunshine and around average for the time of year. Now, with clearer spells to end the day on Friday, we might just see a touch of frost forming quite early across some central and eastern areas. But cloud will swiftly move in from the east once again. So by the time we start Saturday, frost will mostly be across Scotland and higher ground over England and Wales. So just a patchy frost to start the weekend there. Otherwise, as we go into Saturday, we draw our attention to this band of showers to the northeast. That's going to bring showers down northern and eastern coast through Saturday. And these could be wintry over some higher ground as it marks a change to some more northerly winds, bringing some colder weather across the whole of the UK by the time we get through to next week. But for the rest of the weekend, some sunny spells around, but wintry showers starting to show their hand too, and temperatures around average.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.